the topic of what I wanted to speak about tonight, at least from the poster, was how to be a person. And I think I said at the end of last week's session, I don't have an answer to that. It's actually, at least philosophically, yes, it's there. We can see objectively when we're reading Shastra, Bhagavad-gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, we can understand, at least I can understand what it's saying to some extent in terms of what it means to be a person. In myself and in relationship with other people, other atmas, and with the Supreme Person, Krishna. But what does it mean to be a person on a day-to-day, you could say, phenomenological level, as it is, where you can't kind of carry the instructions so easily in the head all the time. Problems come up, and how to kind of deal with things, being myself. How to be myself, that's the question. And the reason this particular topic's of interest to me is because when I first came across the Gita, it was a few years ago, and I was listening to classes at a temple, and I'd go in the evenings and listen to Bhagavad-gita classes, and two verses caught my attention really strongly, and they've kind of captured my mind ever since. And for some people, I think they're probably, they don't really strike them particularly. It's quite obvious. But for whatever reason, I've always, how do you say it? Not struggled, but I'm grappling to understand how they're true. So I don't question they are true. So we're allowed to do this philosophical speculation. So I think the example is if Krishna says, in the Gita, I'm the taste of water. Mental speculation is to say, is it true that Krishna is the taste of water? But philosophical speculation is to say, yes, it's true. But how is it true? And to really question that. So the two verses from the Gita are 3:33 and 3:35. So 3:33, I'll just read the translation. Even a man of knowledge acts according to his own nature, for everyone follows the nature he has acquired from the three modes. What can repression accomplish? So I hear it saying here that we're kind of compelled to act according to our nature. And so the question is, well, what is a nature? Where does a nature come from? I don't have a label on my head. I seem to be changing all the time. What does it mean to have a nature? And how do I understand that on a day-to-day level? And text 35 in the same chapter 33, in chapter 3, it is far better to discharge one's described duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Distraction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties, for to follow another's path is dangerous. I find this fascinating because it raises questions. Well, what is a duty? Does it mean I'm obliged to do something? But as an Atma, I'm free. There may be repercussions. But how can it be said that I'm obliged to do something, if that's what duty means? Is it saying that it's in my best interest? And a duty to who? Duty to God, duty to others, duty to myself. And why is it dangerous? Why is it dangerous if I do something, if I do a duty that's kind of more prescribed based on someone else's nature than my own nature? So these are questions all around Svadharma, which is to do with our nature and duties in this life. But it's intricately linked, I believe, to the concept of Sanatana Dharma. So obviously I'm doing something in this life, but then the question comes, well, what am I doing it for? Am I doing it and connecting myself with the Supreme Person and Sanatana Dharma, or am I doing it just to enjoy myself? So I've just thrown out loads of concepts, and like I said, I'm not going to try and answer any of them. Kierkegaard is. Well, actually, he's not here, but I have transported myself back to the 19th century in Copenhagen. That's our background this evening. And what I want to do this evening is just read some selections from this book. Oh, you can't see it because the background. I'll just read out. It's called The Lily of the Field and the Bird of the Air. And it's by a philosopher, Soren Kierkegaard, who was born in the 19th century. He lived only for 40-something years. He struggled existentially a lot. I mean, by all accounts, he was just frenetic. He was always longing for a relationship with God, but not understanding what it even meant to be a person, just grappling with it. And he went deeply into his own Shastra, the Bible. And what I love is he just took one snippet of a verse from the Bible, which says about taking the lily of the field and the bird of the air as being teachers. And he didn't just say, okay, fine. He actually wrote a book on it. And he wrote a book because he deeply reflected by being in nature with them and seeing how he was compared to them. What is it that they could really teach him? And so that's why I'm picking a few bits from this book. And so the aim is just to share that, and I'm not really going to try and explain anything. I'm just going to read in my most poetic and inspirational attempt and see how it lands. But first of all, a prayer from Kierkegaard to start us off, to start his book. This might go on for a while, so if you feel free to like turn your camera off, close your eyes, however you want to get in the mood. I'm trying to kind of set a mood here and let it kind of wash over you and see where it lands. So the prayer: Father in heaven, that which we in the company of other people, especially in the throng of humanity, have such difficulty learning, and which, if we have learned it elsewhere, is so easily forgotten in the company of other people. What it is to be a human being, and what, from a godly standpoint, is the requirement for being a human being. Would that we might learn it, or, if it has been forgotten, that we might learn it anew, from the lily and the bird. Would that we might learn it, if not all at once, then learn at least something of it little by little. Would that on this occasion we might from the lily and the bird learn silence, obedience, joy. And so I'd also like to say a prayer that I can receive the blessings of all of you wonderful Vaishnavas and my spiritual teachers to be able to really connect what I'm reading here, what I'm inspired by, with the Bhagavad-gita and the Srimad Bhagavatam, and to awaken something in my heart so that I can produce such seductive content. This seduces people to God, this stuff. But that's up to you to decide. I'll read and then you can decide whether that's true. So here we go. Hare Krishna. So the first snippet. Oh, would that I were a bird. Or would that I were like a bird, like the free bird, full of wanderlust, which flies far, far away over sea and land, so close to the sky, to far, far away lands. Oh, alas for myself, I feel simply bound, and yet again bound and nailed to the spot where daily worries and sufferings and difficulties make it clear to me that this is where I live, and for my whole life. Oh, would that I were a bird, or would that I were like a bird that, lighter than all earthly burden, soars into the air, lighter than air. Oh, would that I were like that light bird that, when it seeks a foothold, even builds its nest upon the surface of the sea. But alas for myself, for whom even the least movement, if I merely move, makes me feel what a burden rests upon me. Oh, would that I were a bird, or would that I were like a bird, free from all considerations, like the little songbird that humbly sings, even though no one listens to it, or that sings proudly, even though no one listens to it. Alas for myself, I have not a moment or anything for myself, but am parcelled out and must serve thousands of considerations. Oh, would that I were a flower, or would that I were like the flower in the meadow, happily enamoured of myself, period. Alas for myself, who feel in my own heart that division of the human heart, neither to be capable of selfishly breaking with everything, nor capable of lovingly sacrificing everything. Therefore, it is almost cruelty for the gospel to praise the lily and the bird, saying, you shall be like them. Alas for myself, I in whom the wish is so true, so true, so true. Oh, would that I were like a bird of the air, like a lily of the field. But it is, of course, impossible that I could become like them. That is precisely why the wish is so fervent, so wistful, and yet so burning in me. How cruel it is then for the gospel to speak like that to me. Indeed, it is if it wanted to force me to lose my mind, that I shall be what I feel altogether too deeply, just as deep as the wish for it is within me, that I am not and cannot be. I cannot understand the gospel. Between us, there is a difference of language that, if I were to understand it, would kill me. So that's how Kierkegaard opens the book. And we'll move on to the second part. I'm skipping quite a bit, but I'm just picking the bits which I think are really relevant to Dharma, nature, duty. Hopefully it'll build a bit of a story. Okay, let us now look more closely at the lily and the bird from whom we are to learn. The bird keeps silent and waits. It knows, or rather it fully and firmly believes, that everything takes place at its appointed time. Therefore the bird waits, but it knows that it is not granted to it to know the hour or the day. Therefore it keeps silent. It will surely take place at the appointed time, the bird says. Oh no, the bird does not say this, but keeps silent. But its silence speaks, and its silence says that it believes it, and because it believes it, it keeps silent and waits. Then when the moment comes, the silent bird understands that this is the moment. It makes use of it and is never put to shame. This is also how it is with the lily. It keeps silent and waits. It does not ask impatiently, when is the spring coming? Because it knows that it will come at the appointed time. It knows that it would not benefit in any way whatsoever if it were permitted to determine the seasons of the year. It does not say, when will we get rain? Or when will we have sunshine? Or now we've had too much rain. Or now it is too hot. It does not ask in advance how the summer will be this year, how long or short. No, it keeps silent and waits. That is how simple it is. But nonetheless, it is never deceived, something that of course can only happen to shrewdness, not to simplicity, which does not deceive and is not deceived. Then the moment comes. And when the moment comes, the silent lily understands that now is the moment and makes use of it. Oh, you profound teachers of simplicity, should it not also be possible to encounter the moment when one is speaking? No. Only by keeping silent does one encounter the moment. When one speaks, even if one says only a single word, one misses the moment. Only in silence is the moment. Just a little point here. Kierkegaard mentions somewhere else, he's not speaking about silence with no talking, because he speaks about how when birds tweet, that is also silence. So I think he's talking about a silence that Srila Prabhupada speaks of, which we can connect with. I'll continue. And this is surely why it is so rarely happens that a human being properly comes to understand when the moment is and how to make proper use of the moment, because he cannot keep silent. He cannot keep silent and wait. This perhaps explains why the moment never comes for him at all. He cannot keep silent. This perhaps explains why he did not notice the moment when it came to him. Even though it is pregnant with rich significance, the moment does not send forth any herald in advance to announce its arrival. It comes too swiftly for that. Indeed, there is not a moment's time beforehand, nor no matter how significant it is in itself does the moment come with commotion or shouting. No, it comes softly, on lighter feet than the lightest tread of any creature, for it comes with the light step of the sudden. It comes stealthily. Therefore, one must be utterly silent if one is to perceive that now it is here, and at the next moment it is gone. Therefore, one must be utterly silent if one is to succeed in making use of it. But of course, everything depends upon the moment. And this is surely the misfortune in the lives of many, of far the greater part of humanity, that they never perceived the moment. That in their lives, the eternal and the temporal were exclusively separated. And why? Because they could not keep silent. Okay, we'll move on to the third piece. It's to do with obedience. A little drink. Just water. The obedient lily obediently submits to its circumstances and bursts forth in all its loveliness. We human beings, or rather a human being in the lily situation, would say, "Oh, it is hard. It is unendurable when one is a lily and is as lovely as a lily. Then to be assigned a place in such a location, to have to bloom there in surroundings that are as unfavorable as possible, that are as if calculated to annihilate the impression of one's loveliness. No, it is unendurable. It is, of course, a self-contradiction on the part of the Creator." That is how a human being, or we human beings, would certainly think and speak if we were in the lily's place. And then we would wither from grief. But the lily thinks differently. It thinks as follows. Of course, I myself cannot determine the location and circumstances. This is thus not my affair in the least way. That I stand where I stand is God's will. That is how the lily thinks. And that things actually are as it thinks. That this is God's will can be seen from its appearance, for it is lovely. Solomon in all his splendor was not arrayed like this. Ah, if one lily differed from another in its loveliness, this lily would have to be awarded the prize. It possesses one additional loveliness, for there is really no art to being lovely when one is a lily, but to be lovely in these circumstances and in such surroundings, which do everything they can to hinder it. Fully to be oneself in such surroundings and to preserve oneself, to mock all the power of the surroundings. No, not to mock. Lilies do not do that, but to be entirely carefree in all one's loveliness. For despite its surroundings, the lily is itself, because it is unconditionally obedient to God. And because it is unconditionally obedient to God, it is unconditionally free of cares, which only those who are unconditionally obedient, especially under such circumstances, can be. And because it is wholly and fully itself and is unconditionally free of cares, two things that correspond to one another, directly and inversely, it is lovely. Only through unconditional obedience can one unconditionally encounter the place where one is to stand. And when one encounters it unconditionally, then one understands that it is unconditionally a matter of indifference, even if the place is a dunghill. Even if the situation the lily encounters at precisely the moment it is to spring forth is as unfortunate as possible, is so unfavorable that as far as it can judge in advance with something close to certainty, the lily can predict that it will be snapped off at that very instant, so that its coming into existence becomes its downfall. Indeed, so that it seems as if it only came into existence and became lovely in order to perish. The obedient lily submits to this obediently. It knows that such is God's will, and it springs forth. If you saw it at that moment, there would not be the least indication that this unfolding was also its downfall. It sprang forth in such rich, beautiful fashion. So richly and beautifully did it go forth, for the whole thing was just a moment. It went to its downfall in unconditional obedience. In the lily's place, a human being, or we human beings, would certainly despair at the thought that coming into existence and downfall were one. And then in despair, we would hinder ourselves in becoming what we could have become, even if only for a moment. It is otherwise with the lily. It was unconditionally obedient. Therefore, it became itself in loveliness. It actually became its entire possibility, undisturbed, unconditionally undisturbed, by the thought that that very moment was its death. Ah, if one lily differed from another in its loveliness, this lily would have to be awarded the prize. It possesses one additional loveliness. To be lovely like this despite the certainty of downfall at the same moment, and truly confronted with one's downfall, to have the courage and the faith to come into existence in all one's loveliness, only unconditional obedience is capable of this. As noted, the certainty of downfall would disturb a human being, so that although only the briefest of existences had been allotted him, he did not fulfill the possibility he had in fact been granted. To what purpose? He would say, or why? He would say, or what good will it do? He would say. And then he would not develop the whole of his potential, but would be culpable, crippled and unbeautiful as he was, of having succumbed in advance of the moment. Only unconditional obedience can encounter the moment, unconditionally exactly. Only unconditional obedience can make use of the moment unconditionally undisturbed by the next moment. So that was number 3 out of 7. Some of them are shorter, some of them are longer. So that was quite a long one. The 4th one that I picked, patience. Let's call it patience. Oh, he has the patience to bear with you and me and with all of us. If God were a human being, what then? Long, long ago, he would have had to become sick and tired of me, to take myself as an example, and of having anything to do with me. And he would have had to have said what human parents say, though for very different reasons. The child is naughty and sickly and stupid and slow-witted, and if there were only something good about it, but there is so much bad about it, no human being can endure it. And no human being can endure it. Only the God of patience can do it. And now think of the countless number of human beings who are living. Oh, we human beings speak of it as a task of patience to be a schoolmaster for little children. And now God, who has to be the schoolmaster for this countless number, what patience? And what makes the requirement of patience infinitely greater is that where God is the schoolmaster, more or less all the children suffer from the delusion that they are big grown-up people, a delusion of which the lily and the bird are so entirely free that it is surely for this very reason that unconditional obedience comes so easily to them. I like that one. That was patience. Okay, the 5th one is about joy. Oh, but out there with the lily and the bird, or out there where the lily and the bird teach joy, there is always joy. And the lily and the bird never find themselves in an embarrassing situation, as sometimes happens to a human teacher when he has written his teaching notes on a sheet of paper or has them among his books. In short, somewhere else and not always with him. No, there where the lily and the bird teach joy, there is always joy. It is, after all, within the lily and the bird. What joy when day is dawning and the bird awakens early to the joy of the day. What joy, even though in another key, when the dusk is falling and the bird hastens home to its nest. And what joy the long summer day. What joy when the bird, not merely like a joyful worker who sings at his work, but whose essential work is singing, joyfully begins his song. What new joy when his neighbor, too, begins, and then the neighbor across the way, and when the whole chorus joins in, what joy. And when finally it is like a sea of sound that makes the forest, the valley, the sky, and the earth resound, a sea of sound in which the bird that sounded the opening note now frolics with joy. What joy, what joy. And so it is throughout the bird's entire life. Everywhere and always it finds something, or better, it finds enough in which to take joy. It does not waste a single moment, but it would view as wasted every moment in which it was not joyful. What joy when the dew falls and refreshes the lily, which is now cooled off and prepares to rest. What joy when, after its bath, the lily sensually dries itself in the first ray of sunlight. And what joy the long summer day. Just consider them. Consider the lily. Consider the bird and look at them together. What joy when the bird hides behind the lily, where it has its nest and where it is so indescribably cozy, while it passes the time in jesting and bantering with the lily. What joy when high up from the branch, or higher up, all the way up in the cloud, the bird blissfully keeps its eye on its nest and on the lily, which smilingly turns its eye up towards it. Blissful, happy existence, so rich in joys. Or is the joy perhaps lesser, because, narrowly understood, it takes so little to give them such joy? No, this narrow-minded understanding is indeed surely a misunderstanding, alas, an extremely deplorable and lamentable misunderstanding. For the very fact that what gives them such joy is so little is proof that they themselves are joy and joy itself. But is this truly so? If what one rejoiced over was nothing at all, and yet one truly was indescribably joyful, this would be the best proof that one is oneself joy and joy itself, as are the lily and the bird, the joyful teachers of joy, who precisely because they are unconditionally joyful, are joy itself. For example, The person whose joy is dependent upon certain conditions is not himself joy. His joy, after all, is that of the conditions and is conditional upon them. But a person who is joy itself is unconditionally joyful, just as conversely, the person who is unconditionally joyful is joy itself. Oh, the conditions for becoming joyful cause us human beings much trouble and concern. Even if all the conditions were fulfilled, we perhaps would not become unconditionally joyful anyway. But you profound teachers of joy, is it not true that it indeed cannot be otherwise? Because with the help of conditions, even of all of the conditions, it is, of course, impossible to become more or other than conditionally joyful. Indeed, the conditions and that which is subject to the conditions correspond to one another. No, only the person who is itself, who is joy itself, becomes unconditionally joyful. And only by becoming unconditionally joyful does one become joy itself. Okay, let me check the time. Okay, wow, I've gone quicker than I thought. So we're on number 7. What is joy? Or what is it to be joyful? It is truly to be present to oneself. But truly to be present to oneself is this today. This to be today, truly to be today. And the truer it is that you are today, the more you are entirely present to yourself in being today. The less does tomorrow, the day of misfortune, exist for you. Joy is the present time, with the entire emphasis falling on the present time. Therefore, God is blessed he who eternally says, today. He who is eternally and infinitely present to himself in being today. And therefore the lily and the bird are joy because by silence and unconditional obedience, they are entirely present to themselves in being today. There are many things which I have skipped through in this book, so I really recommend kind of reading it from front cover to back cover. It's quite thin, but I'm just going to read the last page because I like to spoil things for people. So he's speaking about us. You abide in God. For if you abide in God, then whether you live or die, whether things go well or badly for you while you're alive, whether you die today or only after 70 years, and whether you find your death at the bottom of the sea at its greatest depth, or you are exploded in the air, you still do not come to be outside of God. You abide, thus you remain present to yourself in God, and therefore on the day of your death, you are in paradise this very day. The bird and the lily live only one day, and a very short day, and yet our joy, because, as it has been shown, they genuinely are today, are present to themselves in this today. And you, to whom the longest day is granted, to live today, and this very day to be in paradise, should you not be unconditionally joyful? You who even should, since indeed you could, far, far surpass the bird in joy. This is something you are assured of every time you pray this prayer, and something to which you also draw near every time you fervently pray this prayer of joy. And it's a Christian prayer. Yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Hare Krishna. So there were many other things I'd like to speak about in this book, but I didn't actually mark them. I only marked that many. But I guess we have some time now, probably about 15 minutes or so. So if anyone has any thoughts they'd like to share, please go ahead.
Thank you, Ramananda Prabhu. That was really excellent. I love Kierkegaard, and you made some excellent selections there. What first came into mind, you mentioned phenomenological, I hope I said that right, a daily life kind of way on being a person. And then you mentioned that that Gita verse, I forget the number, about doing our own duty. So there's an excellent example that came, there are two examples. So one of them, this happened just like a couple days ago or a week ago. I was at a grocery store in Massachusetts, and there's a guy stocking the shelf, and this carton, a bottle of milk or something, he dropped it and it rolled right in front of my feet. And I stopped dead in my tracks, and I was actually really confused on what to do. I'll explain why in a moment, but fortunately there was another guy working there who was also right there, and he picked it up and went on. And I think I heard them talking about me after, like, oh, why didn't he pick it up? Why didn't he help us? So that's one experience. A similar experience, I was in Thailand, just moved there for the first time, didn't know anything about the culture, and was really stressed out teaching there. And I needed some water to make some tea or coffee or something to like wake me up and not be stressed out all the time with all these kids jumping at my back, right? So I saw where they kept the extra water jugs, and I just went by myself, picked it up and filled it in the machine, the, tap dispenser thing. And this was a hugely bad, sinful thing to do in their culture, because there was a guy who's a secretary. It was his job to do this. And so by me doing this for him, it was very insulting. It's kind of like saying, oh, I can do my job better than you, and I'm just going to, do that now, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So I didn't do it with that intent, but that's how they perceive it. And so I guess my point is, well, I don't know if I have a point, but there is cultural differences here. So that Bhagavad Gita verse it's actually alive and well in the East. These Eastern cultures, they actually live like that, especially in Thailand. There's many stories like this of stupid white foreigners who, they say, oh, I saw a pothole in the street, so I thought I'd just, fix it up because it's been 10 years and no one's fixed this pothole. But the Thais, they really don't have that. They get kind of insulted. They get very insulted, actually, by this stuff.
So you're saying it's like you've noticed that there are, at least you've been in cultures where there are people are kind of sticking to this, you could call it duties maybe, quite, and they quite enjoy doing that. It's very important to them, that this external concept, like, oh, that's that person's job, that's that person's job. Everyone kind of knows where they stand, and that
Right. So I would describe the East as duty-based cultures, whereas the West, we are actually not duty-based. We are more like truth-based or logic-based. You could say logos. That's a very Christian and ancient Greek word, but there is a fundamental difference there. And actually in the East, it's largely unconscious. So I don't think they actually, it's just like, that's the ocean they're swimming in. They don't know that that's the ocean they're swimming in. That's just like who they are. So they just kind of react a lot like that. But I think what it's based on is Bhagavad Gita and Confucianism and a lot of these other ancient Eastern wisdom texts. They really focus on duty as like the cardinal thing.
Thank you for sharing that, Vijayananda. Sankarshan, are you any good at seeing whose hands have been up? I know Jagapalna, I see Rupa Vilas. Yeah.
Yes, there was Jagapalna, and then Rupa Vilas Prabhu, and then Rashma.
Rupa Vilas Prabhu, please go ahead.
Rupa Vilas Prabhu?
You were in front of, no, you raised your hand first. You go right ahead.
I would like you to go first, Prabhu, please.
Okay. Well, Ramananda, I can't, I know that you may not really want to hear this question, but what I really want to know is how you felt, what realization you got from these selections that you read. I'd like to hear some of your own reflections. Of course, we can always go on about ours, but I'd rather hear yours.
Yes, thank you for asking, Rupa Vilas. One of the reasons I wanted to read this is because I don't I have some reflections, but I'm struggling to put them into kind of words. And so I thought if I kind of try and express something through a certain medium, it might help. But one thing I'm considering is around the question of duty, and duty to who. So for example, I can take a duty to be external as a duty to other people, and that's okay. You know, whatever works, I guess. Or I can see my understanding of what Kierkegaard said, it resonated with me because it seems like I have a duty to myself to act in my nature, in terms of being who I am and in connection with God, with Krishna. And if I don't do that, it's dangerous. But why is it dangerous? Because actually it's very painful to not be myself. And if a lot of people in society aren't being themselves, you end up a right old mess. Externally, yes, in terms of societal structure, we can say that's the case. But it's ultimately coming from the fact that individuals aren't being themselves. And therefore, I like seeing a duty as a duty to myself, not necessarily to others, because I can hold myself more accountable. I don't know if that came out in the right way, but I'm trying to kind of understand how I can connect with that word, because I find it difficult. Thank you. And Jagat Panda?
Yes, if I can quickly respond, comment on your last remarks. Maybe this could be helpful, because duty, you mentioned the verse, and the Sanskrit word is dharma. So I think it would help if we start from the word, what the word dharma means. Prabhupada explained, I think his introduction to the Bhagavad-gita, Prabhupada explains what dharma is, means the constitutional nature of something. I think Prabhupada says that the dharma of water is liquidity. If please intervene if I'm wrong. Yeah. So it's taken from that point, maybe it can be clear. So duty means, okay, let's use the word dharma, which we're talking about duty, but let's use the word dharma, which I think if you use the word dharma is clear, maybe. So dharma means you doing your dharma means you doing your what you meant to do, what you constitutionally meant to do. Like the duty of water is to be liquid. If it's not liquid, it is not water. So
yep.
It's very much linked to our who we are.
Yeah, I hear you, Jagat Panda, and to kind of how do you say, juxtapose that with how the word duty comes across in my mind. It's very much like, if you don't do this, we're not going to like you. And that yes, can be how
that's why I'm moving to dharma, for that specific reason. Mm-hmm. Because I think that doesn't help.
I see.
It puts what we can, crudely say, wrong idea in your head. That's why I would like you to more think about the word dharma and the word duty, because the word duty with you is loaded with the background understanding, I mean, we're not going into details of your, when you brought up that. So that doesn't help. It's misleading. That's why it's better if you concentrate on the original word, which is dharma. And what does the word dharma mean?
Very good. Thank you.
Another point I wanted to make, the original point I wanted to make is, I really liked the bit on joy, that the argument that Kierkegaard makes about joy, because he is what, please, I'm just trying to paraphrase it, please intervene if you remember the exact quotes that, basically, if I understood, Kierkegaard is making a point, is joy because he's being, that's what he's being, that's what he is. I forgot the exact word that he uses, because it is being himself. What is the word exactly they uses? Because it's the core of the argument. So it's better if you repeat verbatim the word that he says it, the way he phrases it.
Maybe it's this. I'm not sure. If what one rejoiced over was nothing at all, and yet one truly was indescribably joyful, this would be the best proof that one is oneself joy, and
There
joy
is
itself.
oneself joy. Yeah. The thing is one. You have to be is oneself joy.
Hmm.
The one who is joyful is the one who is himself joy. Yeah. Just
Yes.
bear with me. This it doesn't matter. I mean, so what this reminded me, again, that's the way it seems to be operating, which works for me. I was looking at what is the Sanskrit, what is that in Vedic literature. Maybe if you agree with me, is the word Ananda. The verse came to mind, Anandamayo Bhyasat, that we translate, it is, I think Prabhupada translated, or at least we recreated as, we are looking after happiness or joy. Actually, the verse says, Ananda Maya Bhyasat, that the we are Anandamoy. Anandamoy actually means more closely to the way Kierkegaard depicted. Moy means something that is made of.
Mhm.
Moy is with short R. There is Maya and Maya. We should not be confused. Yeah. Anandamoy literally means, like Krishna's famously, Acharya quotes it all the time. Acharya quotes Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita in 17.3 when Krishna says that we are Shraddhamoy. We're made of faith.
It's
Yeah?
the substance.
Made of. There's you find this word everywhere. It literally, the most closest literal meaning of Maya, which is long, yeah, as in Ananda Maya Bhyasat, is made of. So this verse, if you have a literal translation of this Ananda Maya Bhyasat, this verse states that we are made up of joy, which is much more, it basically is our identity. We are joy. We are made up of joy. Like Krishna says, living entity in this world is made up of faith. It's not an option. You don't have faith. Krishna says you don't have faithful people and non-faithful people. Everybody's faithful. We are made up of faith, but this made up of faith, it depends from which modes we're under. There are many examples in this. We can look at the way the word Moy. Moy is a Bengali pronunciation. It's Maya short. Ananda Maya Bhyasat. So we are made up of joy. We are kind of a lump of joy.
It's. I'm getting the idea when you kind of pull back all of the when I kind of pull back all of the nonsense. Yeah, what I actually am, what everyone else is as Atmas is joy, and that's like you said. That's what Sri Bhagavatam I'm saying. That's what Kierkegaard's alluding to in this kind of poem as he's been observing.
Yeah.
Not obviously.
Very nice. Was a very nice. I like the way he phrased it, and I like the way it was a very nice. I like the way he presented it. This idea of being made of as being situated in joy.
Yeah, this is a Princeton translation. It's Danish originally, so I can't, guarantee. I have no idea what he originally said, but
then very good. Then you can just have it in the Vedic way, let's say, in the Sanskrit way, because it's a translation. Then you give you the freedom to translate it in the Sanskritic way, which there's no harm, I guess.
Thank you, Jagat Pandra. I think we were last. You had your.
It's Reshma.
Reshma.
Yes, but before I go, I think Prajumna, did you have something as well? Just passing on.
No, I just at that moment I want to just compliment what the Jagapana was saying about the word maybe could be unconditional. That was also from that section that I still remembering that it was mentioning this whole idea that you can try to look for conditions to reach that state of happiness. So trying to look for things that are outside or some context or some externals, thinking that happiness is outside. But as what Jagat was properly pointing out, is that you are made of. So you're trying to look in the outside for that those conditions to reach that state. But actually, what Kierkegaard was saying is that the unconditional way of reaching joy was the proper one, because as soon as you put on looking for conditions, you are relying on, or you are constrained by the conditions to keep that joy. So in this case, the strong point is precisely that, like we are made of joy. So in the end, there's nothing that we can do to run away from that. We don't need any conditions. And that's a realization. And again, as many times we have mentioned before with that's Maya in the end. Maya is the idea that you are not joy. Maya is the idea that you forget that constitutional composition. Just that.
Thank you, Prabhupada.
Thank you. That was really nice. I really appreciated that the first few segments really brought out the difficulty that Kierkegaard was going through in navigating his identity. Essentially, that's how I took it. And then the section that struck me, which I think interestingly was just before joy, that Jagappan and Prajumna commented on, was obedience. And generally, I think obedience that term has a lot of negative connotations to it. But when it's framed in this way, with the extracts that you chose prior to that, then you start to see that actually that's almost like a turning point of growth. Because, he's trying to find his identity. And I guess we have two levels here. And I think you touched on this, Ramananda, before you started reading the extracts. There's the search for identity in terms of our, I guess you could term it, psychophysical nature in this world, who we're meant to be, like in this lifetime. And then we have the actual eternal identity that we have as a spirit soul, and full of bliss, ananda, and cognizant. And so it's almost like reconciling all of that. And when the obedience point came up, for me, it was almost like those two worlds came together, because he seemed to have accepted he's a lily and he doesn't need to compare himself to anyone else in the field, and he just needs to do his thing and bloom. But what does that look like? What does that look like in a world where there's just such, there's so many disturbances? You can feel so destabilized. And then there was that point of just, I guess, submission to, so I've figured out a little bit anyway of who I'm supposed to be, but it's almost like it went a level deeper and started to touch on, these eternal spiritual identity. And like I said, negative connotations, but the way it was presented was just this mood of submission to something more than yourself. You're trying to figure out who you are. And then there's a point where it's like, well, who am I meant to be within the world? I don't know if that makes sense, but and I think, and I think I liked that, because I think to some extent, a lot of people that are spiritual seekers or, exploring, particularly Krishna consciousness, come to a point where they're faced with that. You're looking for something, and then you have to kind of submit to the idea that you may have to seek that understanding of who you are, that complete understanding of who you are, from sources beyond yourself. Transcendental knowledge from authorities, from other people. And I don't know if that, I hope that made sense, but I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Reshma. Ruperlas?
That was a great point, Reshma. Thank you. I was just thinking, I always come back to this verse, Jivera Swarupoi Krishna and Das, and yet that verse scares people. That your constitutional position is to be a servant. So generally, servitude, submission, obedience. Most people get scared by these kind of concepts. They feel threatened by them almost. And yet, they're not actually threatening. They're actually the key to real happiness, but they're misunderstood. That we think happiness is about being masters or being controllers. And yet nobody gets happy that way. They have the facsimile of it, or sometimes they have what do they call ersatz, this German concept of a fake. They can fake a kind of happiness or imagine a kind of happiness, but it's not real. The real thing is to actually be that, and which is the position of joy, to be a servant of God. That's where happiness lies, and yet the words that surround it somehow are intimidating.
Yeah. It seems that it's like if let's say I was kind of like if I see myself as a lily, the argument seems to be, well, I can't do that. I need to figure out what I need to do first in my life. But I like the point being made here, which is that ultimately I don't have a choice where I am. I just have to be who I am. I might think, oh, I need the right vocation. And I've struggled with that. Like, I need to get in the right job that's going to really align me. But he says here, he says, where is it? Shall I seek to secure a position that corresponds to my abilities and strengths so that I can be effective in it? No, you shall first seek God's kingdom. His point seems to be all along, it doesn't matter about the Svadharma. Can't come by just thinking about my vocation. It will come by these, the kind of the silence and the kind of obedience, which he's basically talking about, which I'll really then, in the moment, be myself, whether I'm in a hellish condition of life, or whether I have the kind of thing that suits my skill set perfectly, and I'll be in that job, and all the conditions will be perfect. It doesn't make a difference. If I'm just being myself. And yeah. Sorry, I saw a few other hands up as well. But I know we're running over, so Sankarshani, you tell when to pull the plug.
Yeah, I saw a couple of other hands go up. Maybe we'll get those two, because I'm sure we can squeeze that in. There was Vidyananda, and then there was Jagapalana.
Okay, so I'll try and be quick. It's really interesting that Kierkegaard and many other great thinkers, when trying to figure out what is human, they use all these subhuman examples. I know subhuman is a word that has all the baggage too, right? Plants, animals, these sorts of things. We look to these examples in awe and reverence, and it's a really strange idea. And Kierkegaard is really good at explaining how there is something there. Like we should be more like the lily and the birds and the bees and whatever else, but we can't be totally like them, because then we are them. We are the lily and whatever that, but we're human. So what happens, the completion of this, the fully enlightened and self-actualized human does live and act like a child or an animal, basically, but because they're doing it voluntarily, knowingly, and willingly, and after years of experience of cleaning the dust off the mirror of the mind and all the other analogies you can use, well, this person is very rare. It's very hard to see a saintly person who has fully achieved this. And so the most available examples we have are these, are from Mother Nature, basically. But I guess it's just important to remember that if we act like children and nothing more than children, then we're children, which is fine spiritually, because we are children. We are God's children. But yeah, that's it. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vidyananda. And Jagapalana, you were the other one.
Yeah, I really like the point you made, Prabhu. This last point you made. That's very, very thought-provoking, very, very deep. You raise very deep issues, very deep implications. Thank you for that. What I wanted to say is, with regard to Jivera Nitya Krishna Nitya Das, that we are eternal servant of Krishna, I think it is our duty, because we are full, just with the word servant and the word duty, we are full of misconceptions. I think we need to acknowledge that. I think the problem lies there, in my opinion. I think it's our duty as practitioner of Krishna consciousness, with the experience we gained. Also, I think what helps is looking at the life of the greatest servants of God, those who like looking at the life of Prabhupada. What did it mean for Prabhupada to be a servant? In what way Prabhupada was the perfect servant of Krishna? I think it is our responsibility to translate these terms to our fellow citizens. You know, I'm in London, so I need to translate what it means to be a servant of God to my contemporary fellow man living on the other side of the street, or my neighbors, so on and so forth. Do the best to explain in my realization what does it be, if I have any, or what does it mean to be a servant of God, how to act as a servant of God. Because there's a lot of misconception. Immediately, as soon as I say servant, the image comes to mind. That need to be, these are, which are mostly misconceiving idea that need to be clear as far as that point is concerned. Another point I wanted to make, following on Ramananda remarks about being yourself, getting a perfect job rather than being in the present, so on and so forth. The thing is, the thing is that statement, actually, that verse that you quoted from Krishna, you quoted two verses from Krishna.
Uh-huh.
One of them, I think, is Shreya Sodharma Vigura, better to do your work imperfectly than someone else perfectly, better to be destroyed. I think that verse Krishna quoted twice. He mentioned this verse twice, I think, in the Bhagavad-gita. It's so important, I mean, which indicates, there's another verse that I remember of Krishna, Manmanabha, that he mentions twice. But if we agree that he mentions it twice because it's very important, and the way I explain to myself, how is that important? Because, and also you see that in the way Krishna speaks the Bhagavad-gita, he makes the point that we are not this body, we are spirit soul. That's the first point that he makes. But then, if you look at that, that's at least how it looks to me, the way he instructs us in the details throughout the Bhagavad-gita, he deals with us as bodies, as souls in bodies.
Mm-hmm.
For this verse is an example. When Krishna says, Shreya, so maybe you do your dharma than someone else's dharma, Krishna is referring here to your material, no, it's not material, it's spiritual, but is your dharma as a soul within the body. That's why he gives the argument to Arjuna, you are a kshatriya. That is a material designation. Do you follow? Am I clear? Am I making, or am I just speaking?
Yeah, you've said before, Jagapala.
So the point is, the point I'm trying to get to is that because this is your present situation, that's why you should not underestimate. I think there's a historical mistake that we made in ISKCON as neophytes, that we just focus on the fact that you're a soul, you're not this body, and just neglect the fact that you are a soul in a particular type of body, which Krishna talks about it at length, most of what he talks about in the Bhagavad Gita. That is the end result of that is a disaster. So the point is that you know you are a soul and you're nothing to do with the body, but now you are in this body. You are that, and that's what, as far as your practical execution of devotional service is concerned, it's that body, in the soul in that body that is going to execute devotional service.
You said before, Jagapala, just to briefly say, and then Rupa Vilas, but you said, for all intents and purposes, we are the ahankara, or false ego in this life. I think I remember you saying something like that. It struck me very strongly, because in the spiritual world, basically it's, I'm me here in my persona, and I'm me there. All the time it's doing the same thing, or attempting to do the same thing, which is to be me and please Krishna by being me. So in a sense, the only difference is the degree of freedom to be able to do that. But I just wanted to mention that because your point struck me. It was about a year ago now you said it, and it stayed with me, that particular one. But Rupa Vilas.
Oh, let's see. Yeah. I think that this is the Bhaktivedanta and Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, they both emphasize so much Daivi Varnashram. And the way they express Daivi Varnashram is that you do have certain, as someone was mentioning, their psychophysical tendencies. You can't just ignore them, obviously. You have to take them into account, and there has to be side by side, or you could say on parallel tracks, there has to be a kind of service that you can do that is convivial, you could say, with your nature. And, there's the practice of Krishna consciousness, the practice of sadhana side by side. So they have to be harmonic, because if they're not harmonic, there's trouble. And I think that came out in your readings as well. That if there's no harmony there, then there will be difficulty. Anyway, that's just the lesson thought. Thanks.
Thank you, Rupa Vilas. Daivi Varnashram, that concept.
Okay. So I think we might close it off there then.